So let me break that down a little bit. The first part where he said nobody is going to talk. What did you understand him to mean when he said that? Because nobody snitches. And what about the part about conspiracy? What did you understand that to mean? He told me conspiracy to murder in the feds is only 10 years. So if nobody talks, they can't prove nothing, and we only get 10 years. And then the last part where he was talking about D.O. What did you understand that to mean? He told me I might have to take care of him because he will be a potential snitch in the future because he was there. What did you understand take care of him to mean? To kill him? How did you respond when he said that? I told him, I said, nah, he's good. That's my man. He wouldn't do nothing like that. Just to be clear, who were you saying was good? D.O. And what did you mean when you said he was good? I trusted him. That was my friend at the time. You trusted him in what way? Like, I trusted him. We was close, so I didn't think he would snitch on me. Now, after you were released from jail that time, did you return to drug dealing? Yes. Where were you dealing drugs when you got out of jail? I was on parole, so I wasn't going back upstate, but I was giving drugs to people to go upstate. Why didn't you want to go back upstate when you were on parole? Because my parole officer used to always pop up at my house, and if I wasn't home, I would get sent back to jail. So who are you giving drugs to take upstate? I was giving drugs to Brabs, and I was giving drugs to Kiko. Who is Kiko? He's another blazer from the neighborhood. What kinds of drugs were you giving to Brabs? Heroin. How did you get involved in giving heroin to Brabs? I was hanging out in Castle Hill. D.O. told me. He offered me some coke because he said he had coke at the time. But I told him I was good. I was messing with the heroin, with the dope. And he told me I should mess with Brabs because that's what he's doing. So I got a hold of Brabs and I gave him some dope. So let me break that down a little bit. When you said he offered you coke, how much did he offer you? It wasn't an exact number. He just said if I wanted to mess around with some coke, he could get it to me. Did he say where he was getting it from? No. Did he say what kind of quantities he could get? No. He said, no, he didn't tell me. And I believe you said that you were messing with heroin at the time? Yes. Where were you getting heroin from? Killer T. How did you start getting heroin from Killer T? When I first got out of prison, he asked me if I was still messing around, if I was still keeping with money. And I told him yes, and he offered me some dope, some heroin. How much did he offer you? He gave me 65 grams of heroin. Did you pay for the 65 grams up front? No. Why not? He gave it to me on consignment. And where were you when you got the 65 grams of heroin? I met him at his house. Where was his house? On Oxford Avenue. What neighborhood is that in? Riverdale in the Bronx. Was anybody else with you there? Yes. Who else was with you? D. Jones. Now, when you gave heroin to Brabs, what was your payment arrangement with Brabs? I was getting grams from Killer T for 65, and I would just charge Brabs 70. How many times did you get heroin from Killer T? Approximately about 7 times, something like that. About how much did you get each time? 50 and 100. Going back to that first time, I believe you said you had 65 grams. Was all of that on consignment? No, he gave me 10 just to keep for myself, to put some money in my pocket. Then I had to pay him back for the 55. So what did he say about those 10 grams he was giving you? He said, that's you. Keep that money for yourself. I know you just came home, and the rest I had to pay him back for. Do you know why he gave you 10 grams for free? He used to look at me like I'm his little brother at the time, so he was just looking out for me. Now, you testified that the first time you got 65 grams from Killer T, it was at Killer T's place. What about the other times you got heroin from him? Sometimes I would take cabs to his house. I would have D. Jones drive me to his house. Did you always get it from his house? Yes. Did you see other drugs at his house when you got the heroin? Yes. What kind of drugs? I seen cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. How was the cocaine packaged? It was like bricks of cocaine. About how many bricks would you see there? I seen about 5 bricks of cocaine. And what is a brick of cocaine? About 1,000 grams of cocaine. So what does it look like? It looks like a block. What about the marijuana? How was it packaged? I seen about 1 pound of marijuana in like a big type of Ziploc bag. What about the heroin? It was in a brick of heroin with like a block. How many bricks of heroin would you see when you went there? I seen 1. Now, Mr. Lopez, you said Killer T was charging you $65. Was that price consistent with the whole time you were dealing with him? No. How did it change? I told him if he could drop the price for me because I wasn't making too much money off 65, so he dropped it to 60 for me. When was that during the course of your dealings with him? About the second time I got dope from him. Did you charge Brabs the same price the whole time? Yes. Do you know why Brabs wasn't getting heroin straight from Killer T? Killer T really didn't mess with a lot of people like that. What do you mean? He didn't trust everybody. He used to try to keep it in the least circle. Did Corey Brown know you were getting drugs from Killer T? Yes. How do you know that? We had a conversation about it one time. And what did you talk about? It was like, oh, you think I don't know you've been getting dope with Killer T? And we was just in the car driving one day. And then he was like, you should have told me. And that was really it. And when you say dope, just to be clear, what are you referring to? Heroin. How did you respond when he said this to you? Regular. I was just the same way, regular. What does that mean? Could you explain? I just told him, yeah, that I was getting dope from Killer T. Did you tell him how often you were getting it? No. Did you tell him how much? No. Now, you testified that you were getting drugs from Killer T's place. Was Corey Brown ever there when you got drugs from Killer T? No. Was Corey Brown at Killer T's house on other occasions? Yes. How do you know that? We used to all hang out there. Why would you hang out there? I remember he couldn't leave the house because he was on an ankle bracelet, so we would go over there to hang out with him. Who couldn't leave the house? Killer T. Now, when you were hanging out at Killer T's house, were any drugs visible? Yes. What kind of drugs? Marijuana. Do you know how much money Killer T was making? Not exactly. Did you ever see him count money? Yes. What happened? Me and him was counting money one time before he re-upped. How much did you count? We counted probably about 30,000. And just to be clear, whose money was that? Killer T's money. What kind of car did Killer T drive? At that time, he didn't have a car. And when you say at that time he didn't have a car, what time frame are you talking about? 2015. What about earlier, in 2013? What kind of car did he have? He had a Mercedes-Benz, an S53. What kind of car did Corey Brown have? I remember he used to drive his wife's car, a white 5 Series BMW. What kind of car did you have? I had an Audi. Did you have any other kind of car? I had a Mercedes-Benz. Did Brown ever comment on the money Killer T was making dealing drugs? He would just say as long as Killer T on, he's gonna be on because that's his brother, so things like that. What did you understand that to mean? As long as Killer T was making money, that he's gonna be good. Was Brown getting money from Killer T? Sometimes. How do you know that? Sometimes we'd go hanging out and be like, hold on, I'm going to have to shoot over to KT and grab some money. Did he say how much money he was getting? No. Did he say why he was getting money from Killer T? Probably if he was going out somewhere. Objection, Your Honor. Stricken. Did you ever see Killer T pay for Brown? Yes. Where would you see him pay for Brown? When we would go out to the clubs. So what would happen when you went out to the clubs? We would just pay for the liquor, pay for the bottles, and stuff like that. When you say we, who are you referring to? Me and Killer T. In addition to Killer T, was anybody else paying for Brown out at the clubs? Sometimes Dollar come out with us. He might come out of his pocket. Most of the time, when other people came, it came out of their pocket. Mighty came out of his pocket. What do you mean by that? He used to spend money. On who? On like the homies when we'd go out and CB would be with us and he would be there. Would Brown ever do that when you went out? Sometimes. Not most of the time, but sometimes he would. So most of the time, who was paying when you were out with Brown and Killer T? Killer T. Now earlier you talked about Kiko. You said you were supplying drugs to him. How did you get involved in supplying drugs to Kiko? I had these people drive from upstate to come see me, and I was supposed to go back with them, but the plan was to send Kiko because I wasn't going to go upstate. So I introduced him to them, and so he went upstate with them. Was this one time or more than once? More than once. About how many times did Kiko go upstate? I can't remember. What did he take upstate? He was taking coke. How much coke? He was going with about 50 grams of coke. Where were you getting the coke from? Killer T. Did there come a time when somebody else started supplying that coke to Kiko rather than you? Yes. And who was that? D. Jones. Why did D. Jones start giving coke to Kiko? My parole officer put me on a 90-day violation for going back to New York without permission and smoking marijuana. And while I was away for those 90 days, Kiko was getting coke from D. Jones because D. Jones was always coming to me to get the coke. So he just took my place when I was gone. When did you get this parole violation? November 2015. And about how long were you? Or where did you go for the parole violation? I was in Jersey, in Kentop. Sorry? Was it a jail? It was like a jail, like a halfway house, but it was basically a jail. Now, Mr. Lopez, we discussed drug dealing in Castle Hill. Were Sex Money Murder members also selling in Soundview at this time around 2015 or so? Yes. And how do you know that? I used to hang out there. I used to see it. Who was selling drugs in Soundview around that time in 2015? I remember Pootie and El Boogie was selling crack around that time in Soundview. Who is El Boogie? He's another blazer from the neighborhood. Where were they selling crack in Soundview? In the projects. Were they selling at a particular place in the projects? Sometimes they hang out on Cozy Corner. What is Cozy Corner? Randall and Rosedale. Now, Mr. Lopez, you testified earlier that Brown wasn't selling drugs in 2012 because he was on probation. Did there come a time when Brown started selling drugs again? When I seen him after my release in 2015, he was selling marijuana around this time. How did you learn he was selling marijuana? I used to hang out with him. I used to see him selling marijuana. What kind of marijuana was he selling? Sour diesel. Any other kind? That's what I can remember. Who was he selling to? I remember he was giving Kiko weed and Big Dre weed so they could sell for him. What kind of quantities was he selling? Like ounces. And I think you said he was giving Kiko weed so he could sell for him? What does that mean? He would give Kiko weed so Kiko could sell weed for him. And I believe you mentioned somebody else other than Kiko that he was giving weed to. Who was that? Big Dre. Was he in a gang? Yes. What gang? Sex Money Murder. Did you and Brown ever discuss who was supplying him with marijuana? I remember Killer T giving him pounds of marijuana. Anybody else? No. Now, Mr. Lopez, in your meetings with the government, have you reviewed a rap song entitled Best Dope that has been marked as Government Exhibit 401F? Yes. And who is rapping on that song? CB. Your Honor, the government would offer Government Exhibit 401F, subject to connection. Received. And at this time, we would like to read another stipulation. This stipulation has the same preamble as before. Then it says, 1. If called to testify, Rosanna Corrado, a paralegal specialist with the United States Attorney's Office, will testify that Government Exhibit 401E is a transcript of the lyrics contained in Government Exhibit 401D, and B. Government Exhibit 401G is a transcript of the lyrics contained in Government Exhibit 401F and C. 407B is a transcript of the lyrics contained in Government Exhibit 407A and D. Government Exhibit 407D is a transcript of the lyrics contained in Government Exhibit 407C. It is further stipulated and agreed that this stipulation as Government Exhibit 1310 is admissible into evidence as Government Exhibit at trial, dated June 12th and signed by the parties. So, Your Honor, at this time we would offer Government Exhibit 401G as an aid to the jury. And 401F? 401F is the audio file. We would offer that into evidence, subject to connection. They are received. And 1310? Yes, Your Honor. You're offering that? We're offering the stipulation as well. Thank you. And there's a transcript, 401G, that's in the transcript's binder. So if you could turn to that transcript at this time. And Ms. Corrado, could you please cue up 401F? Ms. Corrado, could you pause it now? Thank you. Mr. Lopez, whose voice is that? Corey Brown. And the reference to dope, what is that referring to? To weed. During the portion of the rap where Mr. Brown says haze, what is that a reference to? To weed. What about OG Kush? Weed. What about Sour D's? Weed. Ms. Corrado, could you please skip ahead to about 1 minute and 20 seconds into this rap? Thank you, Ms. Corrado. Mr. Lopez, the reference to Rosedale and Randall, what is your understanding of what that refers to? Cozy Corner. What about Commonwealth? That's one of the blocks near Soundview Projects. And what about the line where Mr. Brown says, blood, sex, money, murder, just to be exact? Saying that he's sex, money, murder. Ms. Corrado, if you could just play a few more seconds. Thank you, Ms. Corrado. Mr. Lopez, directing your attention to the portion of this rap where Mr. Brown says, live and die when we split them pies. What is that a reference to? Split them pies. He talking about drugs. What kind of drugs? Pies is like a slang for bricks of cocaine. And what about the part where he says, bang 'em? What does that mean? Shoot 'em. And what about the part where he says, he snitch, he die? What does that mean? People who cooperate, we're gonna kill you. Mr. Lopez, you testified earlier about D.O.'s drug sales in Castle Hill in 2012 and his sales in Monticello in 2013. To your knowledge, was D.O. selling drugs in 2015? Yes. How do you know that? I seen him. What kind of drugs was he selling in 2015? Cocaine. What kinds of quantities? He was selling weight of cocaine. What does weight mean? Grams. Was this cocaine or crack cocaine? Crack cocaine. All right. I believe you said you saw him. How many times did you see him sell crack cocaine? I seen him about 3 times. So I want to talk about the first time. Where did you see him? It was in Castle Hill, and I seen him give JC about 10 grams of crack cocaine. Who was there? Me, Him and JC. What were you doing there? Just hanging out. How was the crack cocaine he gave JC packaged? In a sandwich bag. What about the second time you saw Dio give cocaine? Crack cocaine during that time. I seen him give about 50 grams to Mighty. Where were you when you saw that? It was all in the car waiting for him to come downstairs. Where was the car? It was parked in front of Stevenson Commons. Why were you at Stevenson Commons? That's where Dio was living at the time. And I believe you said waiting for him to come downstairs. Who were you waiting for? For Dio to come downstairs. Did he come downstairs? Yes. What happened when he came downstairs? He passed Mighty about 50 grams of crack cocaine. How was the crack cocaine packaged? In a sandwich bag. How could you tell it was about 50 grams? Because Mighty told me that's what he was going to get. Do you know if Dio was cooking the crack? He told me, but I never seen him cooking it myself. What did he tell you about cooking crack? He told me that he was getting coke, that he was cooking it himself in the crack. Did he say where he was cooking it? No. And I believe you said you saw Dio give somebody crack on 3 occasions. What about the third occasion? When was that? I seen him give another 50 grams to Mighty. Where were you? The same place, the front of his building, in front of Stevenson Commons. Can you describe what you saw? We waited for him to come downstairs. He got in the car and passed him 50 grams of crack cocaine. And again, this time, how did you know it was 50 grams? He told me it was the same thing as last time. And what was that? Just to be clear for the record. 50 grams. Aside from these 3 occasions, did you ever discuss with Dio other crack sales? Not that I can remember. Do you know how much he was selling generally around this time? Not exactly. Now, Mr. Lopez, yesterday we discussed Brown's status in sex money murder. How would you describe Dio's status in the organization? I just know he had a green light to bring other people into the gang, and he was like in control of Castle Hill at the time. At what time? Around 2015. I want to say 13 and 12 too, when I was selling crack up there with him. How do you know he was in control of Castle Hill around those times? He told me. He told me that he had the block. What did he tell you about it in 2015? Basically said the same thing from before. You testified before that he was selling crack cocaine in Castle Hill in 2012. What about in 2015? I just seen him give crack to JC, so I didn't really see him selling dimes no more. He was kind of like selling weight at this time. So what does it mean generally to be selling weight? To sell larger amounts? Now you said you knew Dio had a green light. How did you know that? From him bringing people into the gang. Do you know of anybody he brought into the gang? Yes. Who? I know he brought in Rome. He brought in a couple of young dudes from Castle Hill. That's what I can remember. How do you know he brought in Rome? I used to hang out with him a lot, and he told me that he was sex money murder under Dio. And when were you hanging out with Rome? I used to hang out with him a lot around this time. Just to be clear, what time frame are we talking about? He told me he brought him into the gang. This was probably 2013. So, Mr. Lopez, I'd like now to go through some photographs with you. Ms. Corrado, if you could pull up Government Exhibit 303 for the witness. Mr. Lopez, do you recognize that photograph? Yes. How do you recognize it? I see a picture of Dio's Instagram. The government would offer Government Exhibit 303 subject to connection. Received. Ms. Corrado, could you publish this for the jury? Thank you. So, Mr. Lopez, just looking at this photograph here, who do you see in the bottom left corner? It looks like Hocus. What kind of shirt is Hocus wearing? A tank top with black dark shades and a fitted cap? Who is behind Hocus in the picture, in the white? With the hat on? The person with the hat on. That's Mighty. What is Mighty doing with his hands? He's throwing up sex, money, murder. Who is next to Mighty in this picture? That's D.O. Do you recognize anybody else in the picture? It's a little small. I see Dollar in the picture. Where is Dollar? He has a Yankee hat on behind, or a Kansas City hat behind Mighty. And I recognize Jay-Z, but he's not gang related. That's about it. Mr. Lopez, just looking at the bottom, what does it say next to King Oski? It says family before everything, sex, money, murder is a way of life. And whose account is King Oski? Dio. Mr. Lopez, I'd now like to show you Government Exhibit 304, which has been marked for identification. Do you recognize this photograph? Yes. How do you recognize it? I see Doc. Who else is in the photograph? Dio, Mighty, and Dala. What is this photograph from? I can't see. Can you tell if it's from a sort of social media site? Oh, it's from Doc's Instagram page. The government would offer Government Exhibit 304, subject to connection. Received. Ms. Corrado, could you publish this for the jury? Mr. Lopez, now that the jury can see this photo, can we just walk through the identifications? So first, who is on the left in the white shirt? That's Doc. Who is Doc? He's another blazer from like the Hunts Point area. Who is next to Doc in this photograph? That's D.O. Who is next to D.O. in this photograph? Mighty. And who is next to Mighty? Dala. Now going to the bottom, what does it say next to Born Bentley? We out here, happy B-Day to my blazer, big bro. Then it's Mighty's Instagram, the first one. The second, that's D.O.'s Instagram. And the third one is Dala's Instagram. And what is the hashtag next to Dala's Instagram? It says blazer shit. What about the next hashtag? It says SOC. Do you know what that means? No. What about the next hashtag? 2 guns up. And the next one? HP. Do you know what that means? Hunts Point. What does it say next to $580 below that? It says my blazers. Do you recognize that Instagram account? Yeah. Whose Instagram account is that? Dollar. Mr. Lopez, I am now going to show you what has been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 305. Do you recognize this photograph? Yes. How do you recognize it? I recognize the people in the photograph. Generally, who is in the photograph? Starting from the left, I don't know who that first person is. The second person to the left is Josnell Rodriguez. The second one is Corey Brown. Mr. Lopez, let me stop you right there. Your Honor, at this point, we would offer Government Exhibit 305, subject to connection. Received. Ms. Corrado, could you please publish this to the jury? Mr. Lopez, whose account is this posted on? D.O.'s Instagram account. And could you walk through the identifications in this picture? Who is on the far left? The far left? I don't recognize the first person. What about the person next to that person? Josnell Rodriguez. Who is next to Josnell Rodriguez? Corey Brown. Who is next to Corey Brown? Troy Heath, Killer T. And who is next to Killer T? The God. Ms. Corrado, if you could take this one down, and if you could show for the witness what has been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 306. Do you recognize this photograph? Yes. Who is in this photograph? I recognize Dala, I recognize Hocus, and I recognize D.O. We would offer 306, subject to connection. Received. Ms. Corrado, would you publish this to the jury? Mr. Lopez, who Who is on the far right in this picture? Far right, that would be Josnell Rodriguez. Who is next to Josnell Rodriguez? Hocus. Who is next to Hocus? I don't recognize that person. Who is on the far left? Dala. Directing your attention to the top, whose Instagram account is that? Hocus. Miss Corrado, you can take this one down. Can you pull up Government Exhibit 307 for the witness? Mr. Lopez, do you recognize this photograph? Yes. Who is shown in this photograph? Hocus, Corey Brown, and Lil Pete. Your Honor, the government offers Government Exhibit 307 subject to connection. Received. Ms. Corrado, can you publish this for the jury? Mr. Lopez, who is on the left of this picture? Hocus. Who is in the middle? Corey Brown. Who is on the right? Lil Pete. Do you know Lil Pete's full name? Peter Rolak. Does he have any relation to Pistol Pete? Yes. What is his relation to Pistol Pete? His son. Is Lil Pete in a gang? Yes. What gang is he in? Sex, Money, Murder. Mr. Lopez, what did the individuals in this picture appear to be doing with their hands? Throwing up Sex, Money, Murder. Directing your attention to Hocus's sweatshirt there, are you familiar with the logo on it? Yes. What is that logo? Team Rolak. Can you read the letters there? T-R. What does the T stand for? Team. What does the R stand for? Rolak. What is Team Rolak a reference to? It was a basketball team for a summer tournament called Shootout for the Soundview basketball team. What is Rolak a reference to? Pistol Pete. Did you have anything with this logo? Yes. What did you have with this logo? I had a hat and a t-shirt. Where did you get items of clothing with this logo? Lil Pete used to sell it. Miss Corrado, if you can take this exhibit down, and I would like to show the witness what has been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 433I. Mr. Lopez, do you recognize the logo in this photograph? Yes. How do you recognize it? Team Rolak. Your Honor, the government offers Government Exhibit 403, subject to connection. Received. Ms. Corrado, will you publish this for the jury? You can take this down, Ms. Corrado. Thank you. Can you please show the witness what has been marked as Government Exhibit 615? Ms. Corrado, can you please bring up Government Exhibit 615? Sorry, 433I. Mr. Lopez, can you describe what is in this photograph? Money. What do you see on the bottom left of this photograph? Team sign.